Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Gurgaon for the 9th Automotive Logistics India Conference. My name's Yiakoumi, and I'm the publisher for the Automotive Logistics Group. It's the 9th conference. Even as I said that earlier, I was amazed. 9 years of discussions and changes, some great strides forward, and some areas where there's not been enough change or even no change sometimes. But India is changing, the automotive industry is changing, and the world of logistics is changing. So this year the theme is the way forward and creating an open, connected and competitive India. The program reflects driver shortages, multimodal networks, smart factories, and the role that logistics will play in making India a centre of automotive excellence. And now, more than ever, we see the logistics challenges of India. In this instance, the weather. We've seen what's happened in Chennai. The most important aspect, of course, is the impact the floods have had on people's lives, their homes, and the tragic deaths. But even for our world, the impact on manufacturing, logistics, and vehicle distribution. Logistics in India, and I'm telling you guys, you're the guys who live it every day, logistics in India can sometimes be a little bit challenging. So you have to be that bit smarter, a little bit more efficient, more ready to embrace and use the information and the data that's out there, and technology to support you. Logistics in India, it reminds me a little bit of the Frank Sinatra song, New York, New York. If you can make it here, you can make it anywhere. And if you need some support to make it here, then perhaps I'd like to introduce you to some companies who can help you, our sponsors, our global sponsors, CHEP, CTM Law, Wallenius Wilhelmsen Logistics. They're called our global sponsors because they sponsor our conferences in the different regions around the world. And our silver sponsors, APL Logistics Vasco, TCI and UTI. Automotive Logistics India also uses our live application. This means that the conference is being streamed live around the world and recorded to watch later. But for you in the room, you'll need to get your smartphones and tablets ready. You'll find the joining instructions on the inside back cover of the program. But the Wi-Fi code and password to get onto the live app is AL India 15, AL India 15. But using Automotive Logistics Live from within the room means that you can interact with other delegates in the conference by posting comments on the live app or asking questions to the panel via the moderators. You can send direct messages to other delegates. And later in the day, we'll have a voting survey so you can participate in the voting survey. We talk about the logistics challenges as well, where you can see perhaps from the room already, people seem to be struggling to get into the conference for 9 o'clock. But don't worry, we do have a very good registration. I'm sure many of you, the room will fill up as the morning progresses. So the first session of the day is looking at the way forward, 2016 and beyond. We'll be looking at some projections, forecasts and thoughts on how the automotive industry is progressing, and then we'll hear a presentation on investment into the infrastructure. So I'd like to start off by welcoming our first speaker of the day, first speaker of Automotive Logistics India 2015, Amit Kaushik, the country head for India for JATO Dynamics. Thank you, Amit.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks, Louis. My name is Amit Kaushik. I represent JATO Dynamics in India. So Zato is actually a company who are market leaders in terms of market intelligence, automotive intelligence particularly. And we have alliance with LMC Automotive. Zato and LMC actually bring in lots of good stuff in terms of in area of forecasting, in area of market intelligence, and so on. So within this session, I'll be talking about India automotive outlook, how Indian automotive industry looks like, and how we perceive India as a key manufacturing hub, as Louis was talking about. What are the key opportunities, threats, and so on. So talking about the agenda of this presentation, I'll start with the global picture, how the global picture looks like in the current scenario. Then we'll jump into the macroeconomic outlook of global markets as well as India, how India fits in within that scenarios. And then we'll have a closer look onto the how automotive industry will perform in the current years, what will be the key challenges, key enablers for the industry, and what will be the key expectations from the industry in coming years. So with that, I'll start my presentation. As you know, 2015 has been a terrific year for most of the market. So most of the market were actually either struggling with the macroeconomic restructuring, macroeconomic pressures, or terrorism. So I think these were the two key elements which were the key highlights of 2015. And beyond that, there were issues coming in, especially from Volkswagen side, especially in the emissions issues which they were facing in a couple of markets. In terms of automotive industry, I think that was the key highlight of 2015, which was coming in from Volkswagen side. So most of the market, as I mentioned, were struggling either from terrorism or macroeconomic structure. Fortunately, India was the market which was actually, of course, there was some issues coming in from terrorism, but of course, I think the market was behaving very positively in the area of automotive particularly. And we have seen quite a good bounce back in the recent year in 2015 in terms of automotive industry. Automotive industry in 2015 actually bounced back quite positively in India, which was most positive in the world, across the world. Beyond India, there was a positivity coming in from China, although the overall growth rates in China are actually slowing down these days, and that there was a positive momentum coming in from Northern America as well. So these were just three major markets which were actually driving in the overall momentum for the world automotive industry. Beyond Germany, that of course that was an exception, especially in all across UK and Europe. So talking about the whole global automotive industry, Germany, India, China, and Northern America were the key enabler for 2015 automotive industry growth. Beyond that, most of the markets were struggling in the area of automotives in 2015. Talking about the real growth rates, which we are expecting right now, and we are actually projecting for 2015 and beyond. For India, we are expecting to end up with the growth rate of roughly 7%, 6.5% to 7% kind of, with the growth forecast which we are projecting at 3.1 million units. This is actually, just to clarify, these are the real numbers which we are projecting for light vehicles. So light vehicle contains the passenger vehicles and the commercial vehicles up to 3.5 tonners. So these are the real numbers which you are projecting, 3.5 million units, whereas the SAR actually projected on the back of strong demand coming in the recent year. The SAR for India is actually quite strong, which is almost 3.4 million units right now. But we are on a bit pessimistic side, seeing the overall emerging scenarios locally from the government side, from the policy perspective, from the real challenges coming in, especially from infrastructure and so on. So we are projecting India to end up with 3.1 million units, which is quite positive at the growth rate of roughly 6.5 to 7% for this year. Beyond India, US, especially Northern America, as I talked about, there will be a very good potential for the growth during 2015. We are projecting 17.39 million units for Northern America, with a growth rate of roughly 6% during the year. Although the SAR again is quite strong, more than 18 million units for complete US if we talk about. Brazil is actually still struggling with the downturn. Post FIFA, there has not been a bounce back. The market is still struggling to come back to the real numbers, the numbers which Brazil was doing a couple of years back. Still, we are expecting Brazil to actually go down by 2.5% compared to this year. Talking about the China again, although the growth rates have come down, but ultimately it's not come. We cannot say that China is actually declining. We should say, I think, in a way, we actually term is that China is actually entering into a maturity stage rather than because the level of maturity which China is, the level of numbers which China is attaining right now are quite huge, and these are the real numbers which drive the world automotive industry right now. We are expecting China to end up with almost 24.2 million units this year, with a growth rate of roughly 2% year-on-year basis. Apart from China, Russia is still struggling, roughly 3.5% decline this year. Japan is also struggling, roughly 1% decline this year. ASEAN is also struggling, roughly almost 5% decline this year, which is projected for this year. So apart from these markets, Germany is also coming into positivity. We expect roughly 5% positivity, especially in coming in from Germany. So with all that, we are actually entering into 2016, and there is a fear of unknown, which we are welcoming for 2016, and we expect that 2016 again these markets will be the key enablers, and the real happenings which we are seeing especially in these 3-4 markets will be the key drivers for futuristic automotive industry. Let's talk about how the macroeconomic perspective we look for 2016 for most of the market. This slides talk about the real GDP growth which we are projecting for 2016 from 2013 onwards. India is, as you see here, India is actually going to be the key enabler of overall growth for world markets in terms of macroeconomy. India, we are projecting roughly 7.4% GDP growth for 2016, and whereas world is expected to grow at an average roughly 2.7% during 2016. Apart from India, there are good positivity which is coming in, especially from China, 6.3% year-on-year growth which we are projecting for 2016. China, apart from China, US is also coming back, roughly 2.5% to 2.7% positive growth for 2016. So overall, if we talk about the key enablers for 2016 are going to be India, China, US, and some part of UK. So these are going to be the key enablers for 2016 from the macroeconomic perspective. We see these markets to actually drive in the futuristic momentum for automotive industry as well. This slide actually just to summarize, because this was more focused, presentation towards India. So what are the key takeaways from this presentation we have? Are we really heading towards the Achhe Din? That's again a question mark still, because there is a positivity in the market, but really if we see the real fundamental drivers are still not in place. If these fundamental drivers would have been in place, I think what the growth rates which we are actually seeing right now would have been double digit in the current years. Still, we see a positivity during 2016 also for India. There's a stable government. We see a very, very positive environment coming into the country, and we see a very, very good growth coming in for India, especially in 2016. There is a low inflation, which is declining inflation is again a positivity for coming in from the macroeconomic perspective for India. There's a reduction in terms of the overall crude oil pricing, although there has been a deregulation for the diesels and petrols in India right now. But I think the overall pricing of the oils are still controlled, and people are really happy. They used to spend quite a bit 2 years, 3 years back. I think this is a positive direction which is coming in especially from crude oil pricing globally. There are some positive aspects coming in from the global commodity prices as well. Although all the commodities are not behaving positively, but there are some commodities which are actually giving a positive positive direction to the global Indian automotive industry per se. There's an improvement in the sentiments on the back of stable government, on the back of improved macroeconomic environment, and focus on infrastructure is yet another thing which is actually putting lots of happening in the market. So there is a clear-cut focus on the infrastructure from the government side. Government want to build in lots of ports, lots of roads. It will take time certainly, but for sure I think there is a positivity all across. There is a concern which is especially coming in from the rural markets still. There have been some deficit in the areas, in some of rural areas. So because of those deficit in rain and because of those concern coming in from the rural areas, still rural markets are struggling. So that's the biggest concern, especially for automotive industry. Most of the numbers, if we talk about in terms of numbers, if we talk about the rural contribution in India, Maruti is almost 1/3 actually sales is done in rural areas, which is quite a big numbers. Almost 35,000 units are sold in rural areas. Talking about Hyundai is also actually contributing a huge numbers. Their contribution in rurals are in between 25 to 30% kind of. Companies like Mahindra, Tatas are banking in on rurals hugely. So that's the biggest concern, which is actually stopping the overall momentum right now in the Indian automotive industry. With all these positive factors, we expect India to emerge as one of the key market in global automotive industry platform, with improved lifestyle as well as low cost of ownership. We expect India to have to see almost double-digit growth in 2016. So we project almost 9.5% growth for India during 2016. The first time buyers are still dominating the overall market, so there's the overall scenario which is emerging right now in the market. And the market is actually a very, very product-driven market right now. It's not really a sentiment-driven market which we see. Whatever numbers we are seeing in India are actually coming in either from new products or the uplifted products. So if we are differentiating the products, companies whosoever are differentiating their products from the competition are actually grabbing in the overall pie of the market. If you see the overall scenario which has emerged in the past 7 to 8 months, there has been an emergence of very, very good a different portfolio altogether, which so-called premium hatchbacks in India, which was never been in India until now. In past 1 year, Hyundai has been able to grab in a decent pie of the market within this premium segment of hatchbacks, which is being priced almost 300% time compared to the entry level hatchbacks. So that's the level of expectation buyers has. Buyers has lots of expectations in India. They want different thing. They want to differentiate from the competition. So if the OEM is able to differentiate from the competition, definitely there is a room of lots of numbers grabbing in those areas. But the A segment, the light commercial vehicle segment, is still struggling. There are lots of pressures coming into that segment, and we don't see any major growth coming into that area, not for this year, but in the coming years as well. With that, these are some of the real drivers which are expected to drive in the futuristic momentum. Talking about the IPP in the recent months, there have been a very good sign coming in from IIP, coming in from the consumer prices (CPI), and coming in from the interest rate. Stabilizing interest rate are yet another key drivers for the futuristic momentum for automotive industry. So we see all of these emerging drivers will definitely support out the overall momentum for automotive industry in India. These slides talk about the overall scenarios which we are expecting between 2014 and until 2022 kind of. So in terms of macroeconomy, talking about the economy, the real GDP growth which we are expecting to 7.5% this year will be sustaining roughly towards 6.1% by 2022. So that's a very positive, positive factor which is coming towards India, and there are lots of hope which global investors are putting into India, and we expect that overall macroeconomic environment for India should sustain in a big way. The real private consumption is expected to improve a bit. Apart from that, the CPI is actually expected to decline in the coming year. So that's a positivity which is coming in towards India. From the consumer perspective also, there will be a huge demand coming in the real-time first-time buyers, especially the improving affordability on the back of improving incomes and improving employment will definitely support out the futuristic momentum in India. From the policy perspective, we see India to be a stable country in coming years. We are talking about GST bills these days. If it gets through within 2016, it is going to be a key enabler for automotive industry. Though for the entry-level cars, it's going to be a threat, of course, because there will be lots of pressure coming in onto the pricing on entry-level cars. But in the longer term, it will definitely a key. I think it will be a key enabler for automotive industry as well. Infrastructure, there are lots of focus on infrastructure coming in from the government side. Government is trying to put in infrastructure, though it will take time, but for sure it's in the longer term we see quite a positive involvement coming in from the infrastructure as well. In terms of taxation, as GST is a key enabler, so let's see how it goes for sure. Emissions 2019, again India is due for next level of emissions. For sure there will be temporary pressures coming in onto automotive market during 2019-20 time frame because of the increased pricing per se. But for sure, in the longer term, we see quite a positive environment, quite a positive thing which will be coming from the emissions perspective also. With that, let's talk about the some of challenges which are emerging these days. Of course, there are lots of focus coming in from the technology point of view, safety point of view, and people are actually more focused toward total cost of ownership these days, rather than the traditional thing which they used to have, the brand loyalty and choosy kind of thing. So the buyer is very, very choosy these days, and they are focusing more towards total cost of ownership. Technology and differentiation strategy are going to be the key enablers for any OEMs in India going forward. So if I can differentiate my car or my vehicle from the competition, I have a huge room to improve my overall market share in India. Apart from that, the reducing product life cycle is yet another key challenge, which is a big challenge for automotive industry these days. As you might have seen, there is a facelift. Generally, there is a facelift for most of the vehicles in between 2.5 years to 3 years kind of these days, which used to be quite a big time for 4 to 5 years kind of earlier, but it is actually reducing a bit during these days. And there is altogether companies are focusing on new products, and they are actually dumping in lots of global products, and they are trying to actually develop those global products as per the Indian taste and choice. So that's going to be the key for the futuristic market. Apart from that, and these actually technological expectations and these futuristic product strategy will definitely put in pressures onto the margins of automakers in the coming time. So these are some of challenges which will be coming in, especially for the automakers, beyond the real challenges which we talked about, the infrastructure issues and so on, which will be coming from the countryside. The big picture, this is a slide which talks about the real SAR volumes which we have been seeing in the recent past for India. If you see the first chart which talks about the passenger vehicle sales in India, the sales in India are actually stabilizing and actually growing a bit in the recent months compared to 2014 and 15. And there has been a positivity all around during these months from the passenger cars perspective. On the what you call LCV perspective, definitely there are pressures coming in onto the LCVs, and we don't see any a room for a major growth in coming years as well for the LCV from the LCV portfolio. With that, we are projecting almost, as I mentioned, 3.1 million for 2016, and this is the real picture which we are showing for India. This is in 2012, the industry used to have 3.2 million units, out of which 2.5 used to come from the passenger car, as well as the rest of 0.7 used to come from the commercial vehicles. For this year, as I mentioned, we are projecting 3.1 million, but next year we are projecting quite a big jump of roughly 9.5% to 3.4 million units for 2016. The major contribution, contribution within this growth will come from the passenger vehicles, which are projected from 2.9 million units compared to 2.6 million units in 2015 for 2000. We project almost 6 million units, 5.8 million units by 2022. Out of that, the majority of growth will be coming again from the passenger cars only. The light commercial vehicle are expected to, we don't see much of room to, grow for light commercial vehicles from here. Although the overall base will improve from 0.5 million to roughly a million kind of units. So it will be again doubling the overall, contribution of light commercial vehicles per se. But the overall growth which we are projecting is coming in from the cars, especially the passenger cars in the coming years. These are the optimistic and pessimistic scenarios which we think. We are talking about 5.8 million units by 2022 in terms of local sales for passenger for light vehicles. So in terms of light vehicles, there are two categories: passenger vehicles as well as the light commercial vehicles. So passenger vehicles, we are optimistic. In optimistic approach, we project roughly 5.3 million units, whereas the base is 4.9. And pessimistic, if there are some issues, there are some disruptions like currently we are facing in Chennai. So we are a bit pessimistic on that direction, and we project roughly 4 million units for 2022 for Indian passenger cars. In terms of light commercial vehicles, we project roughly, the baseline is 0.88 million, 0.9 million kind of. The optimistic scenario goes to 0.96 million, which is again less than a million unit, but the pessimistic scenario actually comes down to almost 0.6 million units by 2022. So there are challenges, as we talked about. There are challenges coming in, especially from the infrastructure is a big issue in India. So for sure, we have to consider those issues, and these are the real base scenarios which we forecast for the future for Indian automotive industry. This slide talks about the segmentation, how we expect from the particular segment. We have actually categorized the market in certain segments, which start from the mini car, subcompact, compact, and so on. So mini car, we don't see a big room to grow from here, especially. But the subcompact car, we are actually projecting that subcompact car should actually improve a bit. Subcompact car, when we talk about it, start from the say 3.5 lakhs range. And goes into 9 lakh kind of thing. So entry level, we don't see major growth coming in from the entry level cars, but the entry level subcompact cars, especially the hatchbacks starting from the Swift kind of a product, will have lots of room to improvement from here. So market has grown a bit, market has uplifted a bit in recent past, as you have seen. There are lots of sales coming in, especially from the premium hatchbacks. And we expect that this actually uplifting will be continued in coming years, and market will certainly focus on the premium segment and will demand more and more technology, more and more infotainment systems into the market, and safety features, of course, which will definitely uplift the overall market a bit. We also bank in onto the compact SUV segment. So our expectations are that the real growth will come from premium hatchbacks as well as the compact SUVs in the coming years. These are the real two segments which will be the key enablers for future growth in India. This slide talk about the real market share which we have as of now. We used to have in 2014. So market was totally dominated by Maruti Suzuki with almost 40% market share, which has actually improved this year to 41%. So that's really interesting thing which is happening in market these days. The second largest was Hyundai at 14%, and third largest were Tata Motors and Mahindra at 12%. Renault Nissan has also a local contribution of roughly 3%. This is based on the local sales basically, and Honda actually has a contribution roughly 6%, whereas Toyota contributes roughly 5% in the overall market. There was 7% which was contributed from others apart from these OEMs, which was contributed from rest of the OEMs including GM, Fiat, and so on. But 2022, we see a different scenario altogether. This chart talks about the 2020 story. So we expect that since market is growing, the base is actually increasing to almost double kind of until 2022. We expect Maruti to lose their overall market share to 27%, whereas Hyundai is expected to lose the overall market share to 11%. So kind of sustaining, but Tata Motors is expected to sustain in a big way because there's a very strong product pipeline which Tata Motors has these days, and there are lots of focus which they are putting in onto the rurals. So these two strategies will definitely help them out in terms of sustaining for the future, not in the medium term, but in the longer term. We see Tata Motors emerging as one of the key players in the market, again, sustaining in the market per se. We also see Mahindra and Mahindra to sustain their market share in the coming years. Apart from that, Renault Nissan is expected to grow their market share by almost double. So from 3%, we project Renault Nissan to double their market share to 6%, whereas Toyota is also expected to improve their market share by 1%. Ford is also expected to improve their market share by 2% from 3% to 5% we project, whereas Honda is expected to retain their market share of 6% during this forecasting horizon. The interesting part which comes in from the others, which is actually 15%, quite a big pie of the market. So such 6 million units and 15% is actually being captured by others. So others are, we expect that the companies like General Motors, companies like FCA and PSA, who are actually again trying to come into India again. Definitely there is a huge room for these companies, provided they work on their futuristic product quite seriously as per the local market needs. So we expect there's a significant room for the other companies in there, and especially if they are able to develop the products as per the real market choices, definitely they will grab in lots of pie of it. This chart actually talks about the real imports and exports which we have as of now and we will have in future from India. We don't see much of room for India to improve in the area of exports. As of now, the real contribution for India which is coming in these days is roughly 600,000 units coming in from the exports, which we project roughly to be somewhere 85,000 or less than a million kind of 900K kind of a thing by 2022. The majority of numbers will coming again from the local consumption, so that's the key expectation. Apart from that, the real imports are also expected to grow a bit on the basis of emerging affordability in the market. So market, definitely there will be lots of room for improvement, but we don't see a major import in there. Right now what we are importing is somewhere less than 800,000, which will be almost doubling by say 1,500,000 kind of by 2022. With that, I will conclude my presentation. There is lots of positivity all around in the market, but for sure there are challenges as well. So as of now, if we see there are challenges coming in, we don't have a scrappage policy, we have inflationary pressures, and apart from that, of course, the near-term pressure will coming in from the next level of emissions. But beyond that, if we see, I think there are lots of positive factors which comes and which supports the overall momentum in the coming time for Indian automotive industry. Political stability is one of them for sure, and apart from that, favoring crude oil pricing and so on definitely will favor the market in coming time. Growing middle class base is the real enabler for the automotive industry in the coming time. Their improving incomes will certainly and the need and urge of the transportation will definitely drive in the futuristic outlook for the cars and automotive industry in the coming. So with that, I'll conclude my presentation. Thanks for listening to me, and if you have some questions, some suggestions. Oh yeah, sure.
Thank you very much, Amit. Thank you for your forecast, although I don't know how anyone can forecast anything in the world at the moment for the automotive industry, but it was good to hear growth in general, growth pretty well globally. We know the challenges of Russia and Brazil, but the rest of the world was relatively positive, and particularly it was good to see positivity for the Indian market over the next mid to long term. So that was very good to hear. But are we going to be able to cope with it? So the next presentation comes from Julian Bevis, who's a Senior Director of AP Muller Maersk Group, but here as a member of the FICCI Infrastructure Committee. So Julian, thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for that introduction. I'm also, by the way, speaking on behalf of the Indian Private Ports and Terminals Association, of which I have the privilege of being the Vice President. So, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much indeed for according me the privilege of standing up and talking here this morning about the vital subject of logistics in India and the equally vital subject of logistics in the automotive industry. By the way, I entirely agree with the moderator's assessment earlier on when he talked about or made reference to Frank Sinatra and New York, New York. If you can make it here, you can make it anywhere. He's dead right in that respect. But I will reassure you that I'm not going to try and emulate Mr. Sinatra's other attributes in terms of singing. I will restrain from that. I had the privilege of speaking here 12 months ago, again on behalf of FICCI, which, as I'm sure many of you will be aware, is one of the two apex industry voices for change and for conveying industry's views to government and other stakeholders. So I thought that it might make sense to try and, first of all, look back at what's happened in the last 12 months in the broadest sense in the logistics industry, and also to then give some thoughts about where we are now, and particularly in respect, obviously, of the automotive industry, and what some of the policy considerations are looking ahead. All of this, I hope, will give some context to discussions that will be taking place around more detailed subjects later on today and tomorrow. Whatever else I say, I think there are four key messages I'd like to try and get over. The first one is that logistics in this country, regrettably, remain too expensive compared to our competitors. As we will discuss, there is no question that progress is being made and serious attempts are being made to address some of these issues, but the fact remains that, and this is not my numbers or anybody else, these is numbers coming from people like UNCTAD and OECD, logistics costs in India represent around about 15% of the country's GDP, by comparison with our competitors, who, broadly speaking, are half that. Now, I don't need to paint a picture. That obviously represents a significant economic distortion and something which policymakers need to address. Now, we can all have a lovely time arguing about whether it's 15% or 14% or 7.5% or 8% or whatever it is. I'm not terribly sure that that really matters. The real point is that there is a substantial disparity between the cost of logistics here and that of our competitors. The second general point I'd like to make is this, and that is that the issue I have just talked about is, at least in my view, something that has to be addressed collectively. It is no good industry pointing at government and saying it's your fault, or government pointing at industry and saying it's your fault, or whomsoever. There is a great deal of noise around this subject, and it needs to be organised, and I firmly believe that industry in the logistics space needs to try and pull together and present a rather more coherent, cohesive picture to policymakers so that they're clear what it is that industry wants, or rather needs, wants being, I think, a rather pejorative term. I think it's very much incumbent on the logistics industry to engage more effectively with our major customers, and thereby to present solutions, or at least clarity on what the issues are, to government in order that they can address it. I think the third point I'd like to make is that, and I know to those people in the room who are seasoned logistics practitioners, it's an obvious thing to say, but not everybody gets the point that logistics is a joined-up business. There's still too much thinking, too much policy making, which looks at ports or airports or roads or whatever it is in isolation. What we all tend to do is say, let's build a port, or let's build a railway line, or let's build an ICD, or whatever it is, forgetting, or at least not giving due attention to the connectivity requirements of that particular facility. I mentioned earlier that I am involved with the Indian Private Ports and Terminals Association. One of the biggest issues that the ports collectively are trying to struggle with is the connectivity of ports to the inlands. We've built ports, not enough, as we'll see in a minute, but those that are there are not connected to their markets in the way that they should be, and we need to work with government and other stakeholders to deal with that. We also, I think, need, in terms of talking about this as a joined-up science, we must focus on the through costs of things, the total cost, and not just the logistics costs, the costs that flow on from inefficiencies in the logistics chain. And certainly in this country, whatever sector of industry you're talking about, whether it's textiles or auto or pharmaceuticals, those costs are significant and can amount to anything up to 35 to 40% of the total cost of moving a box out of this country. And therefore that obviously needs to be dealt with. The fourth point I'd make, and it's a very subjective observation, is that notwithstanding the whole laundry list of issues that people talk about, I have no doubt that they will get addressed in due time. I've had the privilege of living and working in this country for a total of 14 years now, with a brief interlude in New Zealand, which is a stark contrast to what goes on here. But what I have seen is a great deal of change since I first arrived in this country, and a great deal of very positive change too. You only have to look out of the window here, if you can see through the muck in the air, and look at the airport, look at the roads. None of that was there when I first came here. It's only a relatively short period of time in the overall scheme of things, so change certainly can take place, and I'm sure will continue to be made. So, against that sort of overall background, what are the key things that I think are worth pointing up that have happened in the last 12 months, and what do they mean looking ahead? I think the first thing to mention is that there is a clear determination on the part of the government of India to deal with logistics and logistics costs in the context of the fairly obvious, at least to some people, linkage between effective logistics and effective economic performance. The one will not happen without the other, and I firmly believe that government, at least in terms of the rhetoric, recognises that and has plans in place to try and deal with it. I think the second point is that the rhetoric notwithstanding, clearly in terms of delivery, and often not for want of trying, there are obviously some questions, but the more one talks to government, the more one can see that people really are pushing very hard to try and make the necessary changes. One of the key indicators that certainly we look at in assessing the effectiveness of infrastructure is the liner connectivity index, which is a complicated set of mathematics, which is certainly above my head, but which takes into account frequency of vessel calls, size of vessel calls, number of direct services, inland connectivity, and a whole raft of things, where India frankly scores low. It's encouraging to see that that is being addressed in as much as the government has now a clear plan through the Sagamala policy to develop ports right the way around the coastline, because I know some people say, oh, there are enough ports, but actually there certainly are not if one takes the long view and if one takes the view that infrastructure is something that needs to be built ahead of the game rather than as a catch-up. So I think that policy is encouraging to see, and one can only but hope that it will be implemented very quickly. I think it's encouraging to see the debate about the future of the tariff authority for major ports. Lots of people talk about this. it's now pretty clear that the government wishes to get rid of this regulator, because it is widely recognised, and I think this is the important point, that the market in ports, at least in container ports, is economically much more effective than it was. And I think there's a clear determination on the part of government to move us away from regulation and let market forces set the prices. There is a fairly obvious and complicated debate, which I will not go into here, around how you transition the ports on legacy pricing guidelines. I can only hope that that happens very quickly, and that some of the political concerns around that are put to one side, and that we can get on with it and, as I say, move on to market pricing. It's encouraging to see the considerable now interest in waterways. It's become an overworked expression that the use of waterways in this country, as compared to many of our competitors, is very low. And again, there is clear determination on the part of government to deal with that, which is a much more complicated subject, I think, than most people understand. It's all very well to say there are thousands of miles of rivers. Not only, obviously, do you have to deal with the fact that there is no legislation which covers all this, the infrastructure is wanting. We have to deal with the political fact that, obviously, rivers go through a number of states. And there's the huge issue of the fact that the water levels are extremely volatile. It can be done, but it will require an enormous political effort to get states to pull together. But I'm sure that in the fullness of time, that too will happen. We are beginning to see the fact that the country scores, at least in logistics terms, low down on the international scale of ease of doing business. That's being addressed. The Honourable Prime Minister himself has made it very plain that between all of us we have to do better. And I think if ever there was an area where there needs to be a much more open and constructive dialogue between industry, government and other stakeholders, that's it. Unfortunately, a lot of this has been, I think, at any rate, spoilt by a rather lot of finger-pointing. I think we need to rise above all that. I've made the point already that there needs to be greater cooperation across industry and across other stakeholders to address all this. A very interesting subject is the now beginning debate about regulation of rail prices. Hugely complicated area, and we could spend the entire day talking about that one. But the very fact that people like FICCI, for example, are having industry, government interactions around how to deal with this, to tease out some of the policy complications, I think it's very encouraging. It's very easy to say it'll take a long time and that there are entrenched interests. Well, of course there are. There is no country in the world that has gone from state-owned, state-fixed pricing in railways to some sort of market pricing, albeit imposed by a regulator, without a considerable amount of difficulty. The complexity, the sheer size of Indian railways, and the social and political importance it has obviously make this a huge task. But it's encouraging to see that that is beginning to happen. I wouldn't dare put a time frame on how long it will be before that regulator starts to operate. But as I said, the fact is that the process is starting. And lastly, and again interestingly, the major ports which previously had operated, or still operate I should say, very much under the watchful eye of the Ministry of Shipping, again there is a discussion now starting, and the legislation around how the ports operate and their status is being looked at with a view to starting to change their status, not, I don't think, initially to privatisation or anything like that. Clearly that's a difficult issue, but nonetheless to give them greater autonomy, to allow them to operate more independently, which must be a good thing to do. So I think these are all really positive things that are happening. Clearly, we need to see it happen at a faster pace. But I think all of these things, as I have pointed out, I hope at any rate, are portents for the future, which show that some of the big issues in logistics and therefore the impact on this industry are at least being talked about. So let's just have a quick look at the automotive industry here, and then go on to talk about some of the policy areas that I believe between all of us we need to think about looking ahead. Very roughly speaking, the Indian automotive industry now represents something around 1% of the global automotive business, which is may seem small, but it's a big change if you look back to where we were, say, 10 years ago. It represents roughly 1% of Indian exports by value. It's an industry, broadly speaking, which is worth just short of $40 billion per annum and growing. Exports to the value of roughly $4 billion per annum. In the last 4 years, it's grown, at least exports have grown, around about 16% per annum. And now this country's auto exports rank number 23 in the World League, at least by the numbers I've got, which is a huge improvement. Obviously, there's more to go, and judging by the previous presentation, I'm sure that will happen. So it's a significant, it's a growing player, but like so many other industries in the country, and particularly so many industries which are in the export-import business, it is exactly the same way as others affected by logistics costs. A.T. Kearney, in a recent survey, showed that logistics costs as a percentage of sales here represent somewhere between 2.5% and 3.5%. But it doesn't seem very much, but when you look at China and Japan, they're somewhere in the region of 1.5 to 2.5. So there's a big difference. Korea is 0.8 to just over 1.12 or something. So again, there's a big disparity. And these are direct costs only. These are not the indirect costs. As I have said earlier, 35 to 45% of the total cost of exporting a container of automotive bits and pieces is due to distortions in the supply chain and inefficiencies, which can amount to anything up to $3,000 US per box, arising from things like losses, breakages, delays, penalties, storage, overheads, you name it. So it's very important to get a grip on all of that, and between all of us to recognise that that problem exists, and collectively to start doing something about it, or at least continuing the efforts which are already in hand to do something about that. I know this is a very speculative sort of number, but we've worked out with the help of some economists, much cleverer than I, that if we could reduce trade costs, total trade costs, that is, so that's the direct and indirect, by something in the region of 10%, we'd see exports go up by getting on for 8%, which would create another 150 to 200,000 jobs and add export value somewhere between $200 and $300 million per annum. So one has to obviously, in engaging with policymakers, talk not just about the industry, whether it's the logistics industry or the car industry, but also talk about the social consequences, the social benefits that flow on from that, and they are obviously very significant. So what do we do about all this? What are some of the policy areas that I believe that we should be addressing? Because clearly we've got an industry which is relatively inefficient, and I use the word relatively advisedly because I think it's terribly important that one looks at logistics costs in terms of other people, our competitors. There's a great deal of importance here placed on the absolute cost or the absolute size of something. One has to look at it in terms of its cost effectiveness. So it's relatively inefficient, it's relatively costly. The ease of doing business score isn't great, and the logistics sphere, generally speaking, does not give the economies of scale that so many operators are looking for. I mean, it's not for nothing that in the aviation industry people build aircraft like the A380. In the container shipping world, we're looking at vessels of 20,000 TEU plus. It's not because, you know, we just want one bigger than theirs. It's simply because if we don't get vessels of that size, then we cannot deliver the economies of scale that we desperately need in order to provide the competitive product that the automotive industry and others obviously so very desperately need. So I think there are 6 or 7 key policy areas which policymakers need to think about. And I make no apology for the fact that some of these are pretty obvious and some are rather motherhood type statements, but they do need to be kept at the front of the mind. Firstly, as I've already said, this is a collective issue. Industry, government, the automotive industry, the logistics industry, we do need to work together much better than we do at the moment because these are very big issues. They're complicated here, obviously, and it won't happen by people all sort of pulling in different directions. We have to settle our differences, if that's the right word for it, to the extent that we can and work together. And I think in that space, an organisation like FICCI and other umbrella organisations do have a role to play, which candidly, I think at the moment, they're not quite doing in the way that they should be, in order to pull views together and represent those views to government. The second general point I'd make is that we simply have to stop trying to regulate everything. There always seems to be an answer in this country, a reaction, I should say, to almost any policy issue, and that is to reach for the regulatory lever. My view is no. Construct things in terms of legislation, both physical and legislative, in a way that lets the market work, because the market is always, at least I think, being an unashamed market type person, is the best regulator of the lot. Thirdly, we do need economies of scale. I've already made the point about, you know, large aircraft, large vessels. It applies right the way across the supply chain. We need to achieve economies of scale if we are to deliver the efficiencies. We need to get ahead of the curve. We must see infrastructure as not just being steel and concrete and railway lines and cranes and all that stuff. We have to see it as the legislation which supports that, whether it's pricing policy, whether it's the customs rules, whatever it is. The two are inextricably linked. You have to have enabling legislation that will enable you to get the best out of your infrastructure. And in some cases we're okay, but in other cases we're not. I've made the point that this is a joined-up industry. I'm not going to make that point again. It's self-evident, but it is a point that needs to be repeated time and time again. You cannot build infrastructure in isolation. You have to think about the way it gets linked. And lastly, and fairly obviously, we have to do all this quickly. There are, I think, 7 or 8 slightly more detailed points that I'd make, and then I'll shut up and we can have a question and answer session if that's what people would like to do. There are obviously more specifics, but I think we need to focus on the outcomes rather than, you know, some of the detail that lies behind it. Firstly, I've touched upon the tariff authority for major ports. We need to deal with that, get rid of it, move everybody onto market pricing. A, for the sake of the port industry, B, for the sake of the customers like the automotive industry that use the ports, and last but not least, for the sake of the investment climate in this country. The current conundrum, the current impasse over what do we do about the TAMP is not sending good signals about this country as a place in which to invest and to do business. Investment does not like uncertainty, statement of the obvious. We all know, it's been referred to earlier, that there are lots of economic uncertainties around the world. Bankers and investors want to go where they feel that there is consistency of policy, and the confusion around all this is unhelpful. we need, I believe, to try and get away from the fact that something in the region of 90-odd% of the containers coming into and out of this country which need transshipment are transshipped outside India. What a waste. Why give all that revenue and the economies of scale to Sri Lanka or to Salalah or Dubai or Singapore or you name it? I mean, nothing against those places. They're all very nice places. But economically, it makes no sense to let other people have that benefit. We need to bring it back into this country. And that's not me saying that the international carriers should have free rein in the transshipment market. Obviously, it needs to be developed in parallel with policies that will give a level playing field between Indian flag operators and international flag operators. Consistent with that, we need to facilitate the development of container hub ports. We need uniformity in the legislation, customs legislation around the country, transshipment legislation, tax legislation is all, despite the efforts of the centre, frequently applied very differently from one state to another, which if you're running a global business, which the logistics business manifestly is, clearly is unhelpful. And again, the automotive industry is a global business. To have disparities in the way policy is applied around the country is something that we need to deal with. We need to have a think about the role of customs. At the moment, customs, I think in the eyes of many, is seen as an inhibitor of trade rather than a facilitator. Everybody knows that the revenue of the country has to be protected, but it has to be seen as a balancing act between how much you protect, how much you collect on the one hand, and the cost of collection and the economic consequences of that collection process. And I think we've seen the needle swing too far. The investment models that are being used here to govern the partnership between private investor and public investors have again swung the needle too far in favour of government, landlords and all the rest of it. It's got to be a balance. I'm not looking for a place in the sun for investors, actual or potential, but people need to see that the risk-reward balance is, broadly speaking, with the needle in the sort of the middle of the dial. At the moment, the needle is one way over to one side, and it's not in favour of the investor, which I think is unfortunate. I've made the point about changing the language. It's no good talking in absolute terms. We have to insist on a dialogue where people talk about the relative cost of things. I've said it several times over, the automotive industry is a global business. People in this industry want to know how much does it cost to build a gearbox in India or China or Germany or wherever it is. They're much less interested in the absolute cost. They want to know what the relative cost is. There are a whole load of old laws which we have to move off the statute book. Very difficult, but it's good to see the Ministry of Shipping is starting to change the Merchant Shipping Act, for example. So that's a good start. And last but not least, we do have to look at the safety record of the logistics industry. It is not good. We need to enhance it. We cannot go on in by any sort of standard behaving in the way that we do. And that's something, again, that needs to be done collectively in order to develop a safer, better place for the people that work in our various industries. So there's quite a laundry list there, and I'm sorry for that, but I hope that gives some idea of where we're at compared to where we were 12 months ago. I think, generally speaking, it's all positive stuff. As I've said, there's a great ability to change, to evolve, to develop in this country. You've seen it in the automotive industry, and I have no doubt that that process will continue. But the fact remains that this is too high a cost area, but I think it can be addressed by collective action. I think it can be dealt with by recognition of the fact that it's a joined-up thing. But as I keep saying, this is a very extraordinary country. Things do happen. They happen in an individual way. but they do happen, and they happen positively. I've seen it over the time that I've had the privilege of living here, and I've no doubt that as we watch events, things will continue to move forward. And I'm sure the debate that will take place at this conference will be a great contributor to that process. So thank you all very much indeed. Privileged to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julian. Interesting presentation where you really highlighted some important points. Some of the most obvious: logistics in India is too expensive, especially compared to your rivals. Using the World Bank Logistics Performance Index for 2014, admittedly, we look at who are the competitors to India. Well, Eastern Europe, Poland is number 31 in the index. China is 15, Vietnam is 48, Mexico is 50, India is 54th. So out of some of your competitors from a logistics performance perspective, you're way below some of your competitors and definitely below most of them. So that's something to think about. And also the cohesive message to the government. I was with the Mexican government last week, or whenever it was. I don't even know where I am at the moment. So, but the message there was talking to the ministers of transportation in Mexico was they keep getting loads of requests. Can you invest here? Can you invest there? Can you invest in ports or roads or customs? But there didn't seem to be a message that they could work properly through. They were just getting a million different requests from people. So there needs to be cohesive action from the government to look at logistics infrastructure as a whole, but we also need to give that message, share information that enables them to make those decisions. So those were amongst the many good points that Julian made. So those were a couple of presentations that were perfect for the introduction to an Automotive Logistics India conference. We heard from Amit and from Jato on forecast the state of the industry and what the perceived growth or forecasted growth globally and particularly in India. We heard some of the challenges from Vicky and from Julian there. So now's the time for you to make your points, whether it's questions to members of the panel, whether it's comments that you want to make, agreeing or disagreeing with the panel. To participate in the questions, if you're in the room, raise your hand, wait for the microphone to come to you, say your name and company and ask the question. If you're watching this being streamed live externally, or even if you're a little bit shy, you can use the Automotive Logistics Live app to ask a question, which we'll see and we can post to the panel. But preference is going to be given to those in the room. So I think we've got a question already at the back there, so thank you.
Good morning. Is it working? Yeah. I actually have a couple of subtle comments. One comment is on Amit Kaushik's presentation. I think the scenario which was presented about passenger vehicles is a bit dated. When we are in December 2015, we can't be talking of 14. And what happens is that you miss 3 or 4 important trends. You miss resurgence of Maruti Suzuki. You miss the resurgence of Honda. And you also miss the SUV trend. So when we project the future on the basis of the present, we also have to have other factors which probably are not considered in this. My comment is towards the shrinkage of Maruti's share and other companies. Today, in any Indian market, the country is very vast and you need to have a network. The network of Maruti is so strong, it will sustain it for many more years. And when you talk of anybody else coming up to that level, they also have to have a car park to support that network, which is not there currently. Secondly, any talk in India about passenger vehicles is incomplete without having at least a reference to the two-wheeler market. India is mainly, the passenger mobility is more by two-wheelers than by cars. So you have to understand the two-wheeler market to have a reflection on the car market. So when we are speaking about the future, I think 3 or 4 trends have been missed. A is how the network will play a major role, how the car park will play a major role. We have missed the SUV resurgence. SUVs below 6 lakhs, 7 lakhs, 8 lakhs are coming by the droves. Today also there is news about Honda launching a BRV to compete with the Creta, and that segment is running away. We mentioned about small cars. What we are noticing is that below 4 lakh cars, 400,000 Indian rupees, is the much is growing. That trend is also missed. We are also missing a very important trend which began just probably end of last year, is of the automatic vehicles. India has been completely against the automated transmission. In the last 1 year, that has become the most sought after. So there are just some points which I thought probably to put in context. So I have a long point. Anyway, this is one. Second comment is on Julian. You know, in this conference, it's important that the data we talk about is factual. I'm not talking about the soft points, I'm talking about the hard points. When we speak about logistics and its cost, there is no debate over it. We have something called the GDP of the country, and the GDP also has an economic survey, which is a government report which comes out every year. The economic survey will tell you that the size of the Indian logistics industry is $110 billion. And the size of the economy is 2 trillion. So that gives you a very simple maths of 5.5%. When we talk of the logistics cost of a country, and that is the problem, we're actually taking away the problem statement differently. Julian spoke about safety. Now for safety, the government has said that we are going to have ABS and speed governors from October 1st. They are talking about air quality and scrapping of old vehicles. What happens with this? You have new vehicles coming in, the cost goes up. We talked about poor quality of roads. When you build infra, what happens? You have toll on that. So all these factors are leading to increase in cost. We have had the plague of overloading earlier, that is going away. Even the car carrier industry in terms of size was a bit unregulated. That size will come down. So India is not in a problem in terms of logistics cost per se. The issue is more about being efficient. So the problem doesn't lie in the cost, the problem lies in the efficiency of it, which you refer to, Louis, in terms of the logistics index. And we fare poorly because of 3 main points. One is taxation. So we didn't speak about GST in the morning. There's going to be a major reform which might change some of these things. We didn't speak about the to safety to such an extent, which is going to be very harsh in the new CMVR laws, which is going to change the dynamics. We didn't speak much about the issue of the human element, which is the drivers and other people. Indian industry per se is still lowly paid compared to the rest of the world. And these are only going up. On 1st of November last month, Haryana government raised the minimum wages by 29%. And that is on a very low base. But all these factors are pointing towards higher increase in input costs. So the answer lies more in efficiency rather than lying in terms of reducing the cost. So I would send Julian a copy of that report. So in the next conference, probably he can give a figure of 5.5% with confidence. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And maybe because Jasjit knew he was going to be controversial, he didn't introduce himself. So that's Jasjit Sethi from TCI. I'll give just very quickly an opportunity to the panel if they have anything to respond necessarily. Or
yeah. So regarding your question towards Maruti, you had a couple of questions towards Maruti, Honda, network, SUVs, small cars, and automotives. The market share which we are reflecting here towards Honda, towards Maruti's decline, actually is a combination. When we forecast, we do consider network, we do consider futuristic programs which they have in pipeline. So these are the 2 major elements, and the capacities as well. One, the capacity, second, network, and third is, of course, the futuristic program they have. The real outcome of the presentation of this decline is actually we are seeing a strong pipeline compared to Honda and Maruti, which is coming in from other what you call players. as per the real market needs. So that's one part of it. Of course, network plays a very, very critical role here, and Maruti has a very, very deep, I would say, presentation, especially in rural areas. But other companies, especially like Tata Motors and other companies, are also working in rurals and seriously. And we are talking about 7 years ahead from here. So these factors can't be ignored, really. Of course, Maruti has a competitive advantage as of now, but we are talking about 7 years ahead from now. What will be the competitive scenarios in order to, to cater into the real consumer demand as per the real customer market and the global portfolio which is expected to come from the global players, especially, is going to be a key threat for a company like Maruti, for sure, in terms of program management I'm talking about. Secondly, of course, the network will play a critical role here. For sure, companies have to work on their network. You talked about Honda. Honda for sure for sure they do have good products as of now. But if you see the history of Honda, I think we don't see much of room as of now. They are I think they are not able to utilize their full capacity. I'm basically ex-Honda, so I know all the details. And apart from that, Honda's futuristic program pipeline is not very strong, to be precise. Of course, they have compact SUV, which is an emerging area in India for sure. But we have to look in the different, the real bread and butter, which is actually entry-level cars, which is really missing, which they will have in 2019 timeframe. But definitely, it will take time for them to penetrate in the market. So these are two elements which I would like to highlight in terms of Maruti and Honda. Talking about the real SUVs, of course, real SUVs we highlighted, and I don't know whether you missed that slide. We talked about that there will be just two key areas which we are focusing as of now. We expect to emerge on a very, very rapid growth. One was of course the entry level hatchbacks, premium hatchbacks, and second was the compact SUVs, where we do have the majority of growth coming in these two areas. Small cars for sure will play a crucial role there. And automatics is when we talk about, of course, because of the time availability, for sure we do consider the automatics. We do consider the automatic manual transmissions and emergence of automatics in India. And for sure it's a part of technology again. So we have considered that. And as far as the two-wheelers connecting with the car industry is concerned, for sure, as of now, two-wheeler is a major industry in India. And we don't cover two-wheelers, to be precise, but we do consider the fact that there will be a special chunk, there will be a significant chunk of the consumers, of the buyers, who will be shifting from two-wheelers to four-wheelers for sure, entry-level four-wheelers per se, as per the need and aspirations for sure will drive them to shift to the four-wheelers. So these are some of real, I would say, respond to some of questions which I would like to.
Thank you.
Julian, you have...
Yeah. Well, firstly, thank you for your observations, which are interesting. I think probably whether it's 5% or 15% or whatever is something that we could probably debate all day. I think the important point is that it seems to me, at any rate, that there are enough indicators, both produced here and elsewhere, which indicate that cost is an issue. And therefore, I would take issue with your suggestion that it's not about cost, it's about efficiency. But I think you're absolutely right when you say that efficiency, productivity, or call it what you like, is clearly a concern, because obviously it is. And therefore policymakers are faced with the awful conundrum of how you balance the requirements for increased safety, increased minimum wage, driver training, and all of that stuff on the one hand, and how you balance that with the need to be cost effective. Whilst I disagree with some of the things you've said, I think you've touched on a really fundamental issue, and that's one of the reasons why I keep banging on about the need for an enhanced dialogue between industry, whether it's the logistics industry or the automotive industry, and government and regulators and other policymakers to try and work their way through it, because you're dead right. You know, you can't just go from the levels of safety or other regulatory issues that we have at the moment to something which is comparable with other parts of the world. It's just not practical. And it's going to be a very difficult process. So I think at the heart of your point lies a very interesting message. It's something that we didn't perhaps talk about very much, and that's fair enough. Time, as the thing in front of me is telling me, time's up. So I think we just have to acknowledge that we can't beat the clock.
Okay, thank you. Is there any more questions from the audience? Okay, a question from my side, really, perhaps for Julian, is we heard that infrastructure, logistics needs investment now for where we are now, but we also heard from Amit the growth, and that is it 5 million by 2020. Is whatever investment is made now will be just about coming into place if by 2020. So is logistics in India, particularly automotive logistics India, should we be in a kind of red alert mode? Are we in a danger zone regards to being ready, the transportation infrastructure being ready for 2020? And where is the investment in the infrastructure going to come from? We surely can't expect it all to come from the government. We also surely can't expect it all to come from private. Where do you think the infrastructure is going to come from? So both of those questions initially, I suppose, to Julian.
I wouldn't go so far as to say that one is in red alert or something like that. Mm-hmm. My point generally is that this is something which needs to be higher up the list of priorities because of the economic consequences of not doing it right. But it's got to be something which is of continuing attention, or for continuing attention by policymakers. As to where the money comes from, I mean, clearly it's going to have to be a mix of government funding, inward investment, investment banks like the BRICS Bank and the Asia Investment Bank and all of that. But at the end of the day, the piper, as they say, has to be paid. And you can't, that's inescapable. And therefore, one of the key sort of overarching policy issues is making the investment environment something which is conducive and attractive to inward investment and or investment by local funding sources. So, I mean, you're right to raise the flag, I think, and it's not just this industry which is raising questions. But I don't think it's something which is something where where we're in sort of panic mode, as long as it is something which continues to be on the agenda and is the subject of continuing robust dialogue.
Mm-hmm. And Amit, I'm not sure if we covered too much exports from India. One of the good things about the slight lack of growth, you might say, the last few years, is it encouraged car makers to look at exports. And again, like I said, last week I was in Mexico, and one of the car makers was telling me about his cars in Mexico being exported from India. So is there anything you want to add on the export side of things?
Yeah, we project export to be doubled within these 7 years. So right now, if we talk about the real exports which are going from India, are close to 600,000 units, and we project by 2020 it should be somewhere 900,000 units. The key exporters from India, of course, as of now, if you see, are Renault Nissan, then Volkswagen, and a couple of other OEMs. But the futuristic, add-on export will coming, especially from General Motors, FCA. These are going to be the add-on players, especially in export areas. Apart from that, Maruti is also considering certain areas, especially in South Africa and ASEAN countries. So that is going to be an add-on volumes for the exports in coming years.
Okay, thank you. Any last questions from the audience? We're kind of our time's up thing is flashing in front of us, but if there's a final question in the middle there, please.
My name is Jagdeep Singh. I am basically from Ford, India. I am also a PhD scholar. Actually, I wanted to make 2-3 points here. Actually, that somebody has argued on this infrastructure in India. As far as I am concerned, I could see like infrastructure must be there in India. Why? Because in India currently we have around 30 km per hour, that is on an average speed, while in Europe we have 60 km. So there is a major difference in India. And coming to this toll and other things, I think toll will not impact much in India. Why? Because at the same time we are going to reduce the cost in the cost, time and emission fuel that we are talking about globally, right? So there are 3 points. We can reduce the CO2 footprint, that is emission. Second is fuel cost also. Why? Because if we are increasing the average average speed from 30 km to 60 or 70 km per hour, definitely that is going to impact. And the third is time. So that is the point from my side. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And as I said, I think we're running out of time. So just some points. As we said, cost is an important factor. If you're going to be a global manufacturing region, and the automotive industry is very global, then cost is important. But I think it's maybe simplistic, as both Julian and Jasjit touched upon. It's too simplistic to just say cost is the issue, because at the moment in India, my fear is that it's too cost-focused, too price-focused, at a time when you also need investment. If you try to do everything, if the biggest focus is on cost, you're not going to get the investment in the trucks, in the infrastructure, in logistics, in rail, in ports that India still needs. So it's that tough line to walk upon, the tightrope to walk upon, when you have to keep costs as low as possible, when there's still investment to be made to enable you to become as efficient as Indian automotive logistics needs to be. But I think what we heard in the first session there really set us up for the rest of the 2 days. The growth and how the automotive industry is going to develop in India, and the infrastructure challenges. That's very much what Automotive Logistics India 2015 is all about. So I'd like to thank our panelists for giving us such a great start to the conference. Thank you very much. And please grab your coffees and teas and refreshments and join us back here in the room at 11 o'clock for a session on India, an automotive sector centre of excellence. Thank you.